Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to today's interview between my friend Harold Fisher of WHUR FM and Dr. Becca Levy from Yale University. And this is the second discussion we've had over the last 2 months with a thought leader on the subject of aging and how we can live healthier and more productive lives based on how we think about ourselves. Dr. Levy has written a book called Breaking the Age Code, which has been well received in so many different quarters over the last year. And let me share with you a couple of quotes from some of the folks who've offered their sentiments. Adam Grant, a New York Times bestselling author, says, "This book will shatter some of your basic assumptions about aging and how we can lead healthier and happier lives." Becca Levy is the world's foremost expert on the psychology of aging, and she shares rigorous, remarkable evidence that one of the best ways to stay mentally and physically fit is to rethink your stereotypes about what it means to be an older person. Dr. Elisa Epel from the University of California, also a New York Times bestselling author, said breaking the age code is a revolutionary paradigm shift in how we think about aging. Dr. Levy has pioneered a new field of research that reveals how our mindset and beliefs shapes our behavior, our ability to heal, and our lifespan in invisible but powerful ways. And my good friend Paul Irvine, chair of the Center for the Future of Aging at the Milken Institute, offered this comment: Becca Levy is already recognized as one of the world's foremost respected experts on aging and longevity. Her thought leadership and pioneering research will change many more hearts and minds. Levy's book is a must-read, an urgent and uplifting call to action, and a roadmap for a future of longer, healthier, and better lives. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Harold Fisher, who will be conducting the interview today with Dr. Becca Levy. Harold.
Gary, thank you so much. And it is once again a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about this really important topic regarding the expanding older population and the many issues they face. As you mentioned, our guest today is Dr. Becca Levy. She is a professor of psychology at Yale University and professor of epidemiology at the Yale School of Public Health. And she is the author of the book, Breaking the Age Code: How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and Well You Live. There's the book right here for those of you who are interested in checking it out. Certainly, as Gary suggested, a required reading for anyone who is interested in this conversation and this issue. Dr. Levy, thank you again for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to join you. And I just wanted to say also, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I'm a big fan of the work that the Center for Workforce Inclusion is doing. I think that it's such an important area of improving society. So I'm honored to be joining you.
Well, let's get right into the conversation. Looking at, the title of your book, it says Breaking the Age Code. What is the age code? How do you define it?
Well, my goal in describing this as the age code is to talk about the many different factors that go into aging. So we know that only about 25% of longevity and aging health is due to biological factors such as genes. So there's 75% of aging is actually determined by psychological factors and societal factors. And one of those really important factors that I've been studying are these age beliefs that exist in a culture that give meaning to aging.
So when you talk about, the factors that impact aging the most, from a brass tacks point of view, is it how you feel about yourself, or is it how others feel about you as you grow older?
Well, I think both things are very important. And I think the meaning that we give aging comes from our culture. So every culture has its own set of ideas and beliefs and stereotypes about what it means to get older and oldest members of the society. So I think those meanings we take in. We know children as young as age 3 have already taken in the age beliefs of their culture, and then those are reinforced over time. And so they're both outside of us, they're in our culture, but then we tend to internalize them from our culture as we get older. And then when we become old ourselves, they start to have particular meaning in how we define ourselves.
That's interesting. I do want to dive down into that particular cultural issue a little bit later. But do you believe that we have certain expectations about ourselves as we get older?
Yes, definitely. So the age beliefs that that I study, one really important aspect of them are that they do contain these expectations. So they're sort of these longitudinal messages of how we're going to get older within society. And they can be about our cognitive health over time, our physical health over time. So there's a lot of messages out there that include expectations.
About those expectations, I mean, anecdotally speaking, I was just thinking to myself, as a younger person, for example, and I would look at people that I would have considered, when I was a teenager, considering my grandparents who were probably, in their 50s, I, saw them as old. But now as I've gotten older, and when we kind of look at the broader issues of aging in this country, is it people who were perhaps in their 50s or even 60s, and sometimes even in their 70s, they just seem to be more active, more vibrant. Their attitudes about aging have changed. That issue about being old has been pushed to the wayside. Am I on point here? Perhaps over the past 30 or 40 years that has changed?
Well, I think there is research to suggest that people are becoming healthier as they at the same age. So as a 70-year-old 100 years ago was probably less healthy than a 70-year-old today. But we also know that these stereotypes, messages about aging, since we take them in at such a young age, we have found that there's this paradox, something I call this age stereotype paradox, which is that even though there's evidence that health is improving, some of the beliefs about aging, unfortunately, have become more negative over time. So, and I think there's, a number of sort of structural reasons for that.
Kind of a mind over matter thing, you think?
Well, I think it's because we know that these age beliefs come from societal factors. So I think we know that there are factors such as the anti-aging industry that's out there that actually generates profit by creating fear around aging. And they put many sort of advertisements in different places in magazines and television, social media that have this message that aging is something to fear, as opposed to something that we can think about the strengths and something that we can actually embrace as we get older.
So what inspired you to write Breaking the Age Code? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, thank you. So that's a good question. So I thought it would be, I really wanted to write the book because I feel like we are now in a public health crisis with ageism, as we've started to talk about. And I think this actually has become worse during the pandemic. So there have been many signs of aging being devalued. So for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this popular meme that made its way around social media that called COVID, the boomer remover, which actually made fun of the idea of older people dying. So there are there's a lot of ageism that has been building in our country. And at the same time, my research has some findings which seem like they're really important that connect to this and also can give hope and improvement in health for people if they knew about some of the research. So our research has found that these messages can have a direct impact on aging health. But we also know from the research that there's something that we can do about it. So we don't have to take in all these negative messages and accept them. We can challenge them, we can overcome them. And we have found that when that happens, people can actually improve their health.
You just mentioned something I think that is so important. And the book was published in 2022. So you had an opportunity to kind of have a boots on the ground observation of the impact of the pandemic. Obviously, we know how it affected the physical health of older Americans. But from your observations, what impact do you believe that the pandemic has had, isolation and all of those other kinds of things, on the emotional, psychological health of people who are aging?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So yeah, the pandemic's had a devastating impact on many people of all different ages, and particularly the older population. So we know that there's been a huge number of deaths in the older population, and it's led to a lot of social isolation. But there's actually this interesting finding that has come up in a number of studies, which has found that when you look at the mental health problems that have come out of the pandemic, that there's actually a much higher level of resiliency in the older population. And so I think, in part because they've developed these skills over time, they've seen different terrible things happen in the world over time. I think there's some research to suggest that they actually have skills to manage and maintain some resiliency. So that's, I think, one of the the positive messages. Although there's many terrible messages of what's happened with COVID as well.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And obviously, I'm not a researcher or a scientist, but that does make sense. Those people who have certain experiences, who have been through stuff and have come out on the other side, may very well be better prepared to deal with the stuff when it presents itself again, whether pandemic, whether it's news of wars, inflation, economic downturns, all of those kinds of things. It's for a lot of older Americans, they may see it as a difficult issue, but they also may say, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and we're going to get through this.
Exactly. I think that's a great interpretation of why that finding. It's been found in many different studies. And I think researchers initially were expecting to find much worse mental health challenges and problems in the older population. But exactly what you're saying, I think because they have this wealth of knowledge and experience, they are able to contextualize it and think about the big picture and how hopefully it's going to pass at some time, that tragedies occur and hopefully we usually emerge out of them. So yes, exactly.
For those of you who may just be joining this conversation, we are talking to Dr. Becca Levy. She is the author of Breaking the Age Code: How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and Well You Live. Dr. Levy, I want to go into a little bit more about not only the findings of the book, but your opinions about aging. What are some of the most common false beliefs about aging?
That's a good question. So there are many of them out there. And actually, one of the things I enjoyed doing in writing the book, Breaking the Age Code, was I developed this list of some of the most common negative age beliefs. And then I looked at the evidence, whether or not they were true. And for each one, I found evidence that they were not true. And also, in the process of investigating them, found that there was often a strength that was the opposite of what the negative age belief was. But in terms of your question about, most common, one of the most common negative age beliefs is that, for example, that all cognition declines in all older people. As we get older, all types of cognition decline. And the science in this one, for example, shows that that's not the case. There are many different types of cognition. There's some types of cognition that stay the same, like procedural memory or the ability to remember how to ride a bike. There's other types of cognition that actually seem to improve in later life. So, for example, the ability to solve problems has been found to improve. The ability to memorize and learn new vocabulary can improve in later life. Also, there's something called metacognition. So the ability to think about thinking seems to improve in later life. So there's a number of different types of cognition that we see different patterns in. And there's also some of the types of memory that that people assume decline. We have found in our research, if we strengthen positive age beliefs, they can improve. And just to give you, if I could give you one example of somebody,
Sure.
An older person that we, so in writing the book, one of the things I also really enjoyed doing was interviewing different older people who live in different parts of the country and the world. And one person who I really enjoyed interviewing actually lives not far from me in Connecticut, who's a man named John, who is an actor, 84 years old. And he took on this memory task of trying to memorize a 60,000 word poem, which, you know, is about the length of a novel. And he, and something that was really, yeah,
That's a lot.
exactly, yeah. And he was successful in doing it. He memorized it. He performed it in his community over a couple of days. And something that I was really struck by is that when he was memorizing the poem, he actually had his own positive image of aging that he thought of. So he thought of this cellist, Pablo Casal, who played beautiful cello sonatas in his 80s and 90s. And so he had this inspiration and motivation of a positive older role model who inspired him to take on this memory task. And then he in turn became a positive older role model for others.
Did he recite the poem?
He did, yeah, successfully. So yes, people said he got it word for word. Did a great job.
Wow, gosh, that's amazing. I don't know whether or not I don't know if I could do that, you know, because I still have all of my information written down. I don't know, but but you know, let's talk a little bit about negative age beliefs and what we can do to kind of combat that. And I guess digging a little deeper, who is the we, first of all, who needs to combat it? Is this younger people, older people, the society in general? Your thoughts about the negative age belief issue?
Yes. So I think, well, in a culture that has negative age beliefs, unfortunately, all different ages are exposed to those age beliefs and tend to take them in. So in a culture that has more negative age beliefs, like our own, there are a lot of the negative age beliefs out there that for us to try to overcome. And did you ask how we can overcome them? Was that your?
Yeah. How can we overcome? And who is the we? Is it all of us, or is there a particular group that needs to focus on that more than perhaps others?
Yeah, I would say all of us. I think as members of a culture, it's almost impossible not to take in the negative age beliefs that are in advertising and social media, you know, in a lot of different formats that we encounter. And unfortunately, often we take them in without awareness because they are so omnipresent. But I think there are tools that people of all ages can take on to reduce the negative age beliefs and to strengthen the positive age beliefs. And to just give you one example that I write about in the book. So in the book, I present about 14 evidence-based tools that people can learn to try to navigate these negative age beliefs. So, I mean, the ideal would be to get rid of the negative age beliefs on a societal level. And I think there is some work that is started that is going in that direction. And hopefully we will, on a societal level, get rid of the negative age beliefs and the ageism. But until that happens, it's also really important to know that there are skills that we can adopt to navigate the negative age beliefs. So, for example, one method or tool that I describe in the book is something called age belief journaling. And what this does, it's a powerful tool that actually allows us to increase our awareness. So as we talked about, these age beliefs can impact us without our awareness. So the first step is to really generate awareness, both of our own age beliefs, but also the messages that we encounter in everyday life. And so with this tool, the age belief journaling, what I suggest is for 1 week, write down every message about aging, every portrayal about aging that you encounter. So it could be, watching your favorite show on Netflix. It could be in looking through a magazine. It could be overhearing a conversation in a supermarket. So anytime you hear somebody talk about aging or you see a portrayal of aging, write it down. And then write down whether it's a positive portrayal or a negative portrayal. And if it's a negative portrayal, take a moment and think about whether there could be a different message, a more positive message, or a message about aging that shows some kind of strength of aging. So for example, if you watch a show and the only older character is a grumpy, mean principal who gives all the kids a hard time, you could think about, well, maybe there could be a different principal that was included in the show. Could it have been a positive older character who actually gave wisdom and shared knowledge with the kids? So I think questioning the negative portrayals is really important. And then the third piece of this is to notice when older people are absent from conversations or absent from different shows that you watch. So if you watch a show and everybody's under the age of 20, write that down, because we also know that the absence of members of a group can lead to marginalization of that group. What we found is that if in 1 week you do all those things, it can greatly increase our awareness of the age messaging, of the negative age beliefs, and strengthen the positive age beliefs and start to bring about needed change.
That's interesting, because in listening to your answer, I can only imagine that these same kinds of tools can be used, say, in mixed company, where you hear something that may be racist or sexist or prejudice. But how does one train the ear to know when you're hearing something that may be ageist, short of something that is so obvious that just makes you bristle at hearing it? Because some of these things, as you know, are subtle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I think it does take some examination. Another thing that I suggest in the book is sometimes if you hear something and you're not quite sure whether it is ageist, think about how it would sound if it were about a woman, for example, or another marginalized group. Because I think it's somehow it's sometimes more socially accepted to have negative ideas about aging. So I think sometimes switching it to a different group helps us. So if you hear somebody say, like, all those older workers are just weighing down the company, we've just got to get rid of them. So think about if that was said about women, all those women, they're weighing down the company, we just got to get rid of them. It sounds awful. So I think sometimes if you think, okay, well, if you say it about this group and it sounds awful, if you say it about older people, isn't it also awful if you're just limiting people, excluding people solely based on their age without considering their abilities and strengths?
It doesn't sound like a bad personal exercise to kind of juxtapose, as you just suggested. And as you said earlier about, older people who are thinking more about thinking, maybe thinking more about thinking isn't just for older people, but again, all of us in trying to, navigate the murky waters of this issue. I do want to talk about something you mentioned, and I think it's really, really important. Cultures, other cultures, to have a broader view of this, not just in your community or in your state or even in this country. You've done some work as it relates to taking a look at positive age belief in other cultures. Your thoughts about that?
Yes. So that's a great question. And actually, my interest in this whole topic started when I had a chance to go to a different culture. So when I was in graduate school, I had the opportunity to go to Japan on a National Science Foundation fellowship. And my goal in going there was to try to understand why Japan had the longest lifespan in the world. And I was particularly interested in trying to understand the factors that are things that we can actually change. And something that I became really aware of as soon as I arrived is how differently it seemed like older people were treated in the society. So unlike some of the ageism that I had observed in the United States, when I arrived in Japan, I immediately noticed that the older people seemed to be much more integrated into society. And there are many examples of older people being celebrated. So, for example, they have a national holiday which celebrates older people. And on television, I noticed that there were older people on these different reality shows treated like celebrities and rock stars, so centenarians and super centenarians, the people who are 110 and older were featured on some of these celebrity shows. And they have comic books that show these older heroes. So I think so that actually sparked my interest in trying to understand, is it possible that this more positive messaging about aging is one of the factors that contributes to greater longevity and greater health span? And that started this whole set of questions, which became the research, which is the foundation of the book.
What else did you find in Japan? I'm curious about that, because whether it's in pop culture, whether it's in movies or literature, anyone who even has a peripheral knowledge of Japanese culture knows, as you're saying, that the older members of the population are revered. And so drill down a little bit more. I'm really interested in hearing more about that, because obviously this is something that in Japanese culture has been going on not just decades, but centuries.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, in writing the book, I actually worked with this great Japanese college student who did a lot of research on the ground. So I don't speak Japanese, but she's a native. So it was great to work with her. And, we did a lot of investigations together. And one of the things that we looked at was we compared children's stories, the United States and Japan. And she came up with these really popular, incredible stories for children that feature these Japanese grandmothers and grandfathers and heroes in a way that just was very refreshing, and I think definitely instilled positive age messages to children, so starting at a really young age. So that was in contrast to my own experiences as a kid. I remember some of the messages about aging, such as in the story Hansel and Gretel, which is something that I remember being one of the first stories about an older person that I was told, preschool. And as you know, it's a story of this older woman who fattens up children so she can eat them. So she's this awful cannibal character. And I remember being very scared of her. And so I don't know how it is that we came up with these stories that have these scary older characters, but there's definitely a difference in some of the messaging for children that I have seen in the United States and what she was finding, in these Japanese fairy tales and stories that are popular there. So there are a lot of different ways which these beliefs about aging can be transmitted to the people of the culture.
What is the thing that you found most surprising while you were there and kind of doing this part of your research and your studies?
Well, one of the things that was particularly surprising, so another thing that we did was we looked at the other end of the lifespan. So we tried to see what was going on with children, but we also looked at some of the oldest members of the society. So they actually have, I think, the highest number of centenarians and super centenarians in the world. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, the oldest living woman, Kane Tanaki, unfortunately just recently died in the last couple months, but she was the longest living person ever I think the second maybe longest living person ever, but the longest living person in the world. And so as part of our research, we actually looked at a bunch of these super centenarians, and we found that one of the things that they did share was this enjoyment of life and this embracing of aging. So I think that, the positive messages about aging we see both, in children and throughout the lifespan up to these 118-year-olds. Yeah.
That's amazing. We are talking to Dr. Becca Levy. She is the author of Breaking the Age Code: How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and Well You Live. So, Dr. Levy, this kind of moves us to another part of the discussion when we're talking about teaching kids, our children, how to fight against ageism. Your thoughts about how to teach them, and also share with us what you believe most young people know or don't know about ageism.
Right. Well, so starting with our children. So, I think that we can actively give children the same skills of becoming aware of age messaging, and also, so something I did actually with my own daughters when they were young, what I tried to do was I tried to give them positive age messaging as much as possible. So I tried to find books and videos and television shows that had intergenerational characters and or storylines and positive portrayals of aging. So I tried to do that as much as possible, but it's impossible to keep out all of the negative age messaging. So the other thing that I tried to do with them was I tried to give them the skills to recognize when there was a ageist portrayal in a story that we were reading together. And they got really good at noticing. So they would point out to me sometimes things that I didn't see. They would say like, hey, that's terrible how the grandma is treated here, you know, or like how she's presented. Why is it such a mean, grandmother idea, you know? And so I think they are characters. So I think kids are really smart at doing this, and it's something that we can help them do. So, and the second part of your question was about
why do you? What do young people know or not know, I should say, about ageism? Because if they don't have, you know, the grand benefit of your parenting skills, for example, and are really kind of, you know, just thrown into, you know, the mix of, you know, people of all ages, you know, there may be a deficit in what they know about ageism.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. I think you're definitely right about that. And so I think, you know, what I have found, so I teach college students and public health students, and something that I find is a lot of times when these students come in, they don't know about ageism. And I think part of the reason is that it's, part of the reason I think is that we live in such an age segregated society. So it's been described that our culture has gone from being one of the most age integrated to most age segregated societies. So I think a lot of younger people don't have opportunities to have meaningful interactions with older people. So they don't get to actually observe some of the ways that these structural factors can be impacting older people. But I think also the World Health Organization has said that ageism is perhaps one of the most pernicious, one of the most widespread forms of discrimination and the most socially accepted forms. And I think the reason that they have said that is, I think, because it's so baked into our culture, as other forms of discrimination are as well. And I think that younger people sometimes just don't see it. But on the other hand, I have found that when they do become aware of it, that they get really angry about it and they start to see it everywhere. And so I think younger people often want to become allies in trying to bring about a more ageist just society when they become aware of all the ways that ageism operates.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that has become quite prominent over the past 10 to 20 years, social media and the rise of technology, the speed at which technology has enveloped all of us. What impact do you believe that social media or even technology has impacted negative age beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good question, and actually something that I recently learned about. Actually, my own daughters actually pointed out to me some of the examples of how ageism is transmitted in social media. And I became really interested in knowing whether that's part of a more general phenomenon. And so I conducted a study trying to analyze different images of aging on Facebook, publicly accessible groups. So we looked at all publicly accessible groups that had something to do with older people, and we analyzed the content of them. And my team found that, unfortunately, most of these publicly accessible sites had negative images of aging. And not only that, but we found that about 40% of them actually had some form of age exclusion that was suggested. So there would be examples of some of the groups saying that older people shouldn't be going out swimming, they shouldn't be going out shopping. So there were these horrible messages that were included in some of these groups. And we actually complained about some of them to Facebook, and they continued to be up there for quite a while. So even though I think social media can be a way to bring about intergenerational contact and help to work towards having an age liberation movement, I think there's unfortunately a number of examples of ageism being promoted as well on social media.
Mm-hmm. access to technology, do you think that's an issue when it comes to ageism and the ability to navigate the complexities of it?
Yes, definitely. So I think there have been some really important reports on the lack of internet access given to a lot of older people. And I think you're completely right that, I think that's actually a form of structural ageism, is I think some of the decisions about how to spread technological resources are based on are not necessarily trying to think about ways to get those resources to older people who can really benefit from them. And I have seen reports that have found that there's this growing exclusion of older people from some of those resources, which are so important in today's society of, finding jobs, for example, which is, I know, a key goal of the center that's sponsoring this.
Yeah, and to that point, because I was just thinking, my stepmother has a computer, and I'd never actually seen anything quite like it, where it is age appropriate. It is not as as complex as some PCs or MacBooks and what have you, but it allows the kind of access that is needed to get information, to find jobs, to get the same kind of information that they may be used to getting with, for example, older people, they like books. They like to put their hands on these things. But as we also know, this isn't the only way to get information about the research of Dr. Becca Levy. There's information online, and there may be other kinds of interviews about you or interviews that you've done, for example, that would be helpful for people who want more than just this, and to be able to have access to that technology, I think is so important. But it can also be detrimental to older Americans if it's not there, or they don't know how, and they, as you said, they can be marginalized if they don't have that access.
Yes, exactly. And I think you're right. And I think access, and part of it, as you say, is also being supported in that access. So, and I think there's this negative age stereotype that older people are not able to learn new technologies, and that we just, that's just also a false stereotype. Older people can learn new technologies. So in all the studies I've conducted, most of them do involve computers. And I've never had an older participant that isn't able to learn whatever it is on the computer that's part of what we're studying. So yes, so I agree that that's a really important area for us to develop and reduce the gap in lack of accessibility to technological resoand
Yeah, I mean, my mother, prime example, she sends me more texts than my daughter. And my mother will Facebook me also. And it's like, Mom, okay, come off of Facebook. I need a nap. So, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting. It's something called the age liberation movement. What is that?
Yes. So in the book, I described this age liberation movement, which is a movement to reduce ageism that we're talking about and to promote the human rights of older people. And it's a movement which I think has started. So there's different signs that it's gaining momentum. I think it's not quite in place yet to bring about large scale social change, but I think there's definitely a lot of signs that it started. I know there's a lot of people that are really interested in joining it. And ideally it would be so in writing the book, I tried to investigate other social movements that have had some success in reducing discrimination and promoting human rights. And one group that I looked at is the disability rights group. And something that they feel very strongly about, they have this famous saying, nothing about us without us. And so I think that's part of what would be needed for a successful age liberation movement, is that ideally there would be older people who are taking the lead, who are taking the charge. But then at the same time, it's really important that all generations work together, younger people can be great allies in the movement. And I think it will benefit everybody. It benefits older people, younger people, people of all different generations and ages can benefit from such a movement.
I think it's interesting. The thing that kind of comes to mind about a movement, formal or informal, is role models. For example, one of the best role models, and certainly it was the late Betty White. I mean, she, we lost her at 99 years old. This was a woman who did not shy away from her age, but she was kind of forever young. And I think to have a high profile, not a high profile, but many high profile role models who have the platform to speak up and kind of change the narrative, I think would be really, really wonderful as part of the integration of this issue into the great town hall discussion.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that's really key, is having these role models, important leaders, and there are a number of them that are stepping up, that are speaking out against ageism and arguing for the opportunities that for people regardless of age. So there are a growing number of, I don't know if there's one single person who's been elevated to that role of taking the charge yet, but I think there are a number of candidates out there who are starting some of the work. So yeah, so Betty White is a great example of somebody that started some of this work.
And speaking of this discussion, this study, age beliefs on health and longevity, really wasn't a field of study until you elevated it. What made you realize that you had to conduct this research? Because you really you're kind of a pioneer in this field. Certainly there was a lot of discussion on it here and there, but I think you really kind of helped galvanize this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. That's very kind. So, so after I got back from Japan, so I described how I had this experience, which really was a light bulb experience for me, starting to think differently about how these age beliefs may actually be contributing to health and longevity. But at the time, all of the research that I could find that was looking at age beliefs actually looked at how these age beliefs impact younger people. So how it impacts younger people's thoughts about their older relatives, or younger people's behaviors towards older people. And I thought it would be really important to give voice to older people themselves and understand how it's impacting them. So I tried to think about how to study this, and looked at a lot of different methodologies and tried to think about a lot of different ways to study it. But what I ended up doing to really try to understand if what I observed in Japan was a real phenomenon, I conducted a study in Oxford, Ohio. So I found this data set that was gathered a couple decades ago by the sociologist Robert Atchley. And what he tried to do was he tried to interview everybody in the town who was 50 and older. And one of the things that he asked them about was their age beliefs. And so when I found out about the study, I was really excited, because there were these age beliefs that were measured decades ago. And so I was able to match those age beliefs to longevity information. So there's information from the government that they collect called the National Death Index, which records everybody's date of death. And by connecting those data sets, and I work with a researcher named Suzanne Kunkel. So together we tried to bring together these research data sets. And what we found was that when we looked at those who had taken in more positive age beliefs in this town at the start of the study, they actually had a median survival advantage of 7.5 years over those who had taken in more negative age beliefs in this town. So that was really sort of a striking finding, is that these age beliefs that they express at a younger age really could have an impact on their health and lifespan.
So one of our viewers has taken issue with my comment about Forever Young. Susan says that Betty White was who she was, with all due respect. Forever Young suggests old is not so good. And Wendy chimes in and says, good point, Susan. And was I off base with that? I mean, certainly that. I mean, help me with that.
Well, I do think they have a point in that. Yes, I mean, she's forever old. Like old is a good. There's nothing that I think if old age is valued, then we could say forever old, or So I do think our culture has a lot of expressions which are really easy to use that subtly say that aging is not necessarily the best age group. So yeah, so I mean, I think being forever the age that you are is great, and thinking about strengths that occur as someone gets older is also part of the process.
So point taken. Are our age beliefs strong enough? You spoke about this earlier about our genes. Talk a little bit more about that, where you say they affect our genes. I know you're not a physician. You're not necessarily. Well, are you? Let me not put words in your mouth. Explain that.
Yes. So no, I'm not a physician. I am a Ph.D. in psychology is my background. So I'm a social psychologist and an epidemiologist. So those are the two disciplines that I come from. But as far as your question about genes, so that's so you're right. So that's a really important idea to think about. And as we talked about, genes do contribute to aging health, but only a small portion of it, not the majority of it. And so actually, I recently did a study trying to understand whether those who are born with a risky gene for dementia, which is called ApoE4, I was interested in knowing whether even in that group that has this high risk gene, do these positive age beliefs benefit them? So in that high risk group, if they take in more positive age beliefs, does that reduce their risk of developing dementia? And what we found was that even in this high risk group, if they develop more positive age beliefs, that they had a 40% reduction in their risk of developing dementia. And not only that, but we found that their risk of dementia became as low as those who don't have the risky gene at all. So it really suggests that there is this role for us to strengthen positive age beliefs, particularly on a structural level. We could probably bring about a number of positive health changes.
And Wendy made another point, and I think it's important to bring this up as well, where she says she sees lots of older adults, boomers, at demonstrations, women's rights, gun control, environmental issues, et cetera, et cetera. She says that we are involved in lots of movements. I think to that point, and I think this is something that we should not miss, and this needs to constantly be elevated as well, is that in the discussion in the town square, elected officials would ignore the concerns and issues of older people at their peril if they don't look at all of the things that are important to them, and maybe indeed some may need to pick up a copy to kind of look at some issues that they heretofore we didn't lose Dr. Levy. I think we may have had some technical issue. I hope we did not lose Dr. Levy. There you go, Dr. Levy.
Yeah, I don't know what just happened, but good to be back.
Yeah, sometimes we have gremlins in the system. The point that I was making was that when you talk about elected officials and the issues of the older population as a constituency. Ignoring those issues is something that they would do at their peril. And I think that, as Wendy was saying in her comments, older Americans are participating in these broader discussions about things that affect not just them, but all of us.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you're right that there are, as Wendy pointed out, there are these older activists who are taking, important roles in many different social movements, and so, so I think that gives us promise too for this idea of this age liberation movement, because I think there are a lot of activists who are out there that that are starting to come together around creating a more age just society as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you would define successful aging.
Yes, so that's a good question. So I think about successful aging as involving both creating meaning on an individual level, but also in having a society that honors aging and gives opportunities and inclusion of older people. And actually, in writing the book, one of my favorite examples that I came across was this example in Zimbabwe of something called the Friendship Bench. And it's this wonderful mental health promotion program of grandmothers who meet people in the community who are having mental health challenges, and they meet them on this what's called a friendship bench, and they listen to their stories and they offer advice and give their own stories in response. And it's been found to be very successful. In talking to the creator of this friendship bench model, he said that one of the reasons it's so successful is that older people in the community are given respect and admiration and given a positive role in society, so they can take on the role of going to the friendship benches and trying to promote mental health. And by doing this activity, it in turn gives the grandmothers meaning, and their mental health has been improved, and even their physical health. And that in turn has elevated them even further in the community. So I think there are these great examples of these synergies of individuals and our culture and society supporting, elevating the older people as well, that brings about successful aging.
Now, we have a question from David, and I think it makes a really good point as we discuss older workers in the workplace. And David is saying that many older workers with underlying health conditions, they fear COVID. Now, they also believe that sharing their fears with their employer would make them appear weak while reinforcing negative age stereotypes. Do you agree? What do you advise? I mean, it's such a perfect question, considering when the book came out.
Yeah, I mean, so it should be, we should have a safe workplace for everybody, regardless of their age, and we should have conditions that make people feel safe of any age. And so, and actually one of the things that, that kind of shocked me at the beginning of the pandemic was the degree to which some of the long-term care institutions did not have the resources to protect its oldest members. So we saw this huge amount of deaths in these long-term care institutions and nursing homes. Whereas in my own college, there was all these efforts to protect the college students who are at lower risk, but give them masks, test them regularly, find spaces to quarantine them. So there was really this institutional difference in how people of different ages, I was noticing, were being protected from the pandemic. So yeah, so that's a great question. And it should be possible to present one's concerns and create a safe environment, and also to reinforce all the strengths that older workers can bring to the workforce. And ideally, that should be happening on a structural level. Each worker shouldn't have to make the argument. We should be increasing the opportunities for older people in the workforce. And particularly during recently, there's been this work shortage in all these areas, and yet older workers are not necessarily being hired for these positions. And I think part of that is due to these negative age beliefs and ageism that we really need to overcome.
It's interesting that you talk about that when we talk about the discussion about clashes between older and younger cultures. Let's talk about the workplace. When someone such as yourself who works in academia, and and I know that you can just pick about any college in America, and you have those professors who have this rich history. They've been there. They've been there for years, and even after they've established, and some of them retiring and establishing, that title, Professor Emeritus, they come back because it seems that they are so highly valued. But then you take, an industry such as, high-tech Silicon Valley, where everybody's walking around in t-shirts and shorts and skateboarding, and the like. Your thoughts about the clash of cultures and where we are right now between younger Americans and older Americans, and how it does not work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I think you're right. There are certain work settings that are very age segregated. I think the average age of workers at Facebook is 28, and it's thought of when you're in your 30s, you're actually
you're out of here. Time to retire. You're 31. You're 32. Time to get out of there.
Right. So I think there are a lot of work settings that do have a lot of ageism. And there's a recent study I saw that 2/3 of older workers report that they experience ageism in the workforce. So ageism is just, very prominent. But I would say in terms of what you describe is the clash of cultures or of age groups. I mean, I think that is a narrative that's really popular in media, of the war between the generations. But my perception is that, I mean, although there are some tensions among some people of different generations, I think for the most part it's just lack of meaningful opportunities to work together. I think it's a lack of opportunities to get to know each other. And we know that meaningful intergenerational interactions is one of the best ways to overcome ageism, in everyday life, in the workplace. So you're getting a really important idea.
Yeah, I have so many questions for you, but I'm getting close to the end of our discussion. So I would like to ask you just very briefly your thoughts about the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Does it work? What is your opinion about it?
Yeah, so I have a lot of admiration for it. I think getting rid of ageism, making ageism and age discrimination in the workforce illegal is incredibly important. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's being put in place in the best possible way. And so, as we just talked about, 2/3 of workers are still reporting experiencing ageism. So I think we really need to overhaul what we're doing in the workforce. And one way that I think is an easy way to start to make some change right away is in these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So we know that in 90% of them, 92% of them, in a recent study, it was found that was conducted in 77 countries, only 8% of them included age as a factor that they were including as an aspect of inclusion. And given the large amount of age discrimination, it's such a easy way to instill knowledge and awareness of how age discrimination may operate, and also to point out some of the many strengths that older workers bring to the workforce. So we know that older workers are less likely to miss days of work due to illness. They're when they're part of teams, the teams tend to be more innovative and more productive. So there's a lot of positive messaging about older workers that would be great to get into the conversation, and ideally that could reduce some of this age discrimination as well.
I only have about 30 seconds or so. Real quick, just some final thoughts from you about ageism.
Yes, so I think ageism is very prevalent, but I think that we have the tools and the knowledge to overcome it. And I think there are these tools that we can bring about on an individual level. But I think the ideal, as we talked about, is to bring about structural change and reduce the ageism so that we have less ageism to navigate in the workplace and in society. And I think that in turn can bring about health benefits and societal benefits for people of all ages.
And where can they find out more about your work? Where can they find that information?
Yes, well, so the book, Breaking the Age Code, we do have a website if you want to find out more about it. It's at becca-levy.com. And that has information about the book. And also there's a little quiz that you can take to find out what your current age beliefs are, how they compare to other people in the country. And you can also contact me and my faculty webpage. If you look me up at Becca Levy at Yale, you can contact me directly that way as well.
Dr. Becca Levy, Yale University professor, scholar, and author. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise with our audience. And I also want to thank the Center for Workforce Inclusion for another penetrating look at the issues facing older Americans. You can find more information about this conversation and others online at centerforworkforceinclusion.org. That's centerforworkforceinclusion.org. I'm Harold Fisher. Thank you for your interest.